I know we touched on technology a little bit, but my question is, how do you see technology continuing to shape our ability to manage and transform conflict? Because it's such a big part of, I guess, where we're heading. So if you can.
Anyone leaping to the technology question? Kevin?
Well, I've already alluded to, I think, some of the ways in which social media has played a nefarious role. We had this hope that it would free people and liberate people and make everyone their own spokesperson, and it has. One of the things that technology has done in terms of decision-making, crisis management, and so forth, is it has shrunk time. So, if you think about the older ways in which a diplomat and ambassador could even with a cable, could send an analysis back to his or her principal, either at the State Department or the president or the emperor or the king, that's now instantaneous. And instantaneous decision-making, particularly in crisis situations, is a petri dish, a fertile ground for the worst cognitive distortions that you could imagine. So my view of technology is, it has to be controlled, but it's uncontrollable because it is monetized. It is, there's always a way to make money off of it. There's always a way to imagine using it for good, but it can also play a very nefarious role. I can remember when, how old am I? When fax machines were new, and I actually was at a workshop where some diplomats argued that the fax would revolutionize diplomatic negotiations. Because in the classic one-text agreement, right, party A would get the agreement and then confer and then make changes and send it back immediately by fax, and wouldn't that solve everything? No, it didn't even save faxes, as we all know. So my point is, technology, among other things, it should be controlled, but it's uncontrollable, and it shrinks time. And in a lot of the work we do, having to make complex decisions and address dilemmas with a decision loop that is measurable in minutes often leads to really bad things.
Thank you. Others?
I think so I'd like to sort of answer in two ways, because I think there's the realm of technology as it applies to conflict resolution and peace building, and then there's technology as it applies to the field of development. And I think that it can play in enormously positive or enormously negative ways. So if we take the conflict resolution field, the U.S. Institute of Peace has spun off a small non-governmental organization called the Peace Tech Lab, which is all about the applications of technology to conflict and peace building. And they have both sessions where they go to a country and look at all the different ways that technology can be brought to bear, whether that's the use of social media to push an alternate narrative that's around a peaceful resolution of conflict and nonviolence, whether that's around the use of technology in journalism, whether that's the use of big data and the harvesting of big data to better track conflict dynamics and the outbreak of violence in ways that enable you to step in more quickly, whether that's using big data to track where you're getting inflammatory speech in ways that have consequences that elevate the conflict and lead to more conflict. So there are all kinds of ways that they're looking at technology, and they also use it as a tool for investment. So where is there risk, and how do you buy down that risk for a private firm that's interested in investing in a given country and understanding better the risk dynamics on the ground? So all of those are both the application of technology and things like social media that can be inflammatory. You look in conflicts now, much more inflamed speech coming from diaspora communities. So you have violent conflict being promulgated by people who are nowhere near the actual conflict zone and aren't grounded in the information or reality of what is on the ground. And you can see how much the technology can be beneficial. In the development space, there's enormous potential for leapfrogging around technology. When I was with U.S. Agency for International Development, the application of mobile technology to get agriculturalists information about harvests and market pricing, the ability to teach child and maternal health techniques on the ground, the use and the development of new vehicles for the delivery of vaccines using advanced technology and coolants, the application of solar technology for water pumping and elsewhere. Those are huge opportunities for development interventions to have a much bigger difference on a much shorter time frame. And when you look at the evidence, you can see very, very big gains consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals as a result of technology. So technology is a tool. And how that technology can be used for good or for bad really depends on how it's deployed. But it's had very dramatically positive consequences in both the conflict and peace-building realm and on the development side.
So we're grappling with this right now in terms of technology. There's some pretty obvious plays, with the microfinance loans for water and sanitation, the electronic payments that are happening through cell phone providers really drives down the transaction cost compared to somebody going around on a bicycle, on collecting weekly payments in cash. So there's some things that are pure technology plays that we're looking at. But then there's also, as technology through social media intersects what we're trying to do. And I think for these big social issues, these big, hairy issues facing the planet, like people getting water and sanitation and making that universal, it can't just be the theory and the wonkiness and kind of, the water credit things themselves, but it has to be a movement, right? It has to be people a critical mass of people that get so outraged that you mean somebody doesn't have safe water, their kids are dying because they don't have water, something we had over 100 years ago, and so how do we ignite that social movement and get people engaged? I guess we should answer the question a little bit through the prism of these chalices that we have here. This is one way, right? With Stella Artois, they created this chalice with artwork from the countries where we work in. Why are we selling a chalice? Yes, it makes money, helps people get safe water, but this is also an on-ramp for people. I mean, not everybody just wants to write a check, and that's great. We need donations, but this gives people something that they can go out and do differently. Oh, I can buy a chalice and somebody will get safe water for 5 years. So we're kind of nibbling at that, at engaging people in a movement in different ways. And the thing that I'm focused on right now is how do we democratize this water equity fund? So I mentioned, for every $1 million investor that comes into the fund, they put in $1 million, 100,000 people get water or sanitation over the 7-year period of the fund, and they get a dividend every year, and they get their money back at the end. But how do we democratize that? How do we get people to say, hey, my Venmo account's just sitting there, there's always a couple of $100 sitting in it, and it doesn't do me any good. Is there some way we can use technology and kind of the way people think about their money and where it sits to tap into that Venmo account overnight, and fund a fund? And so people still have liquidity with their Venmo account, but if you aggregate that over, thousands or hundreds of thousands of accounts, there's capital that just sits there. We can turn that into microloans for somebody who needs water, and then it's an effortless way for that to happen. So I'm pretty confident we can find ways to think about the way people in the United States and Europe think about money and what it does, and how we can translate that into people getting loans for safe water. So I'm pretty excited about that.
I wanted to just comment the point that you're making about the e-banking and the mobile money is really important because, for example, they've now moved to using e-banking and global cards for humanitarian relief. So now people are getting their cash payments, their assistance when they're displaced through a credit card, a debit card. What that does, it has manifestations in a lot of ways. It, first of all, allows you to get rid of the stigma associated with being a relief recipient within a host community, because it's not as obvious that you're receiving that assistance. It also enables money to have more, women to have more access to money, because the money is no longer visible and they can have it in their private account, which is all mobile banking. And so that technology basically allows for the economic empowerment of women at the same time that it decreases the stigma attached to assistance programs. So there's all kinds of secondary and tertiary ripple effects that come from the application of the technology.
Terrific. Terrific. Thank you both.